Oh, GM. Hope you all are doing well today. Hopefully, you guys can all hear me. Oh, it's been an interesting, now 5 weeks after runes. What we've kind of recognized here is that, market will remain kind of stale here at the moment right now, generally, but we saw a little bit of resurgence, and we'll talk about that here in the last 24 hours. We've seen, Dog kind of get back to a $400 million market cap roughly. We've seen RSIC get back to around a 200 million market cap here as well. And we've seen a few other small movers, which is pretty good to see. A little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, which is great. We're kind of at this point of now just hoping, for Binance, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But separately, right, what we're also getting is a very stark reality of, how Bitcoin as an ecosystem will mature. It'll be very different than everything else, right? What we were all hoping for was that the ETH copy paste was going to work, right? This ETH copy paste of bring shitcoin activity in a much more native way. You should be able to unlock this. But the truth was, this wasn't the first time shitcoin liquidity was unlocked. And to be very honest, although it is technically better than what was previously on Bitcoin, it was nowhere near the quality that people were expecting based on what they've seen off of Bitcoin, right? What they've been interacting with on Sol, what they've been interacting with on ETH, wherever their shitcoining may be. So that led to like a fundamental disappointment where, again, the assets effectively did not come together to be able to drive that asset class's value significantly more forward, right? And we know this, right? We know this because we could just see if you go back in a snapshot and look at the pre-Rune market caps of Dog and a few others, they were all significantly higher than what they are today, right? Which means that when the asset shifted from ordinals to runes, it actually lost value, right? And this is also kind of important to kind of think through because the question that a lot of people were assuming was runes was going to be the primary asset class. But in reality, if you think about it, ordinals was the better asset class of preserved value than it was for runes, at least the way how runes has played out. And that's led to a lot of interesting things because now that liquidity has been extracted and now runes are getting decimated. And more importantly, ordinals have been getting decimated. And what we've seen is that a lot of the liquidity that was quote unquote ready or lined up for where this market was going has essentially shifted elsewhere, primarily back probably to Blast at this point. There really isn't a lot of places for this liquidity to go. And the truth is, there just isn't that much liquidity out there as we're not onboarding new users, right? We're just bringing on capital of existing users as well. So this leads to then understanding, okay, then with this knowledge, where should we be digging? What should be the truffles that this opportunity is going to bring? Well, I think it's going to bring a couple, and we're going to talk about that based off these variables, but specifically based off what I'm screen sharing here at the moment right now. Right? What do we always start with? It's always fun to go check out where we are in the current mempool and where fees are. And oh my God, fees are so fucking cheap. Like it has been consecutive blocks of 8 sats, 10 sats, 9 sats, 11 sats. I don't know. We had a 25, 30 sat window here about an hour and a half ago. But in reality, right, pretty much all sub 15, sub 12 sats for the majority of days. And, this is bearish in terms of us understanding the short term activity, but it's bullish for long term opportunities. And this becomes the first truffle you want to start looking for is that this new cost structure that I don't think many people anticipated post having would exist now allows for new projects to still mint and launch. And this means that the market can now potentially see new mimetic narratives launch that should be close to around free meta or low mint meta. Doesn't mean that it's ready today because, to be honest, mints on BTC are struggling. The last week has been brutal. Most of them are not minting out here as well. So, why weren't they minting out? Well, I would argue a lot of them were probably overpriced. They were around 0.002 or higher. But also in general, right, the ordinal asset class hasn't really gotten that spark. But the good thing is no one's really shot their ammunition yet, right? If we think about the existing ordinal assets out there, right, Quantum Cats hasn't really made their play yet. OMB hasn't really made a new play yet since having, right? I mean, you could argue that they did Orange Eyes right before having, But in reality, in post halving, they haven't done much. Node Monkeys hasn't done anything here as well too. So what's exciting is that hopefully these teams, or one of these teams, if not multiple of these teams, are thinking through catalysts that could still be potentially high value to not only their holders, but potentially new holders in. But what this also means that it opens up an opportunity for new entrants. And I didn't think that was really going to be the case in Bitcoin and ordinals because of what I thought the fees were going to be. I thought the new entrants would be massively dropped. But when you're looking at fees at roughly 10 sats here, right, we can actually do a little bit of the calculations, right? Let's go to this kind of InstaCalc. Let's say it's BTC at like 70,000. Oops, I did that wrong. 70,000. And let's say that our fee rate is currently, let's say we get in at 10 and we want to inscribe a pretty large collection size, let's say 5,000 megabytes. You're now seeing that, if you had whatever 300 traits and they all like combined out to like 500, 5,000 kilobytes or 5 megs, your cost to inscribe those is maybe, $8,750, roughly $10,000 if you include like rare sats and metadata as well. It's not that prohibitive anymore, right? Really, a lot of people were worried about, the idea of the cost preventions of people coming in. But what we can now see is new projects can still mint and can still enter the market. And when the cost is only 10,000, it means that the mint price doesn't need to be thousands of dollars. I really would start looking at mints that are 0.001 or lower, right? $70 or lower. I think it's going to be a very interesting meta and an interesting opportunity for risk. Doesn't mean that I'd be minting everything under $70, but I think that meta is going to be available here, which will be pretty interesting. The other thing that we also see is that it means that it's still a wild, wild west. No one built new narrative realistically since runes. No one's really captured anything interesting since runes, right? Sure, we knew dog, we already knew arsic, but if you actually look at almost all the new entrants, nothing really has been that earth shattering. Sure, we had a little run of Wenko Manko, we had a little run of Waddle Waddle, we had a little run of a few of these ones, which are still really interesting on their own, right? But they're not massive outliers to create the gen wealth. And this is kind of still a good thing to a certain extent because it means that there's potentially a precipice that is around the corner or an inflection point that's around the corner that is going to be able to unlock some of these elements and potentially be of high value. So I think this is going to be one of the first areas you want to start looking for truffles is understanding what are new low-cost mints and what are the narratives they're bringing. But there's now a new secondary challenge that comes in this market. And it's actually what we were just talking about with a few of our Diamond community members in our last chat is that there's currently a problem of incentive design, right? Almost all the incentives to participate are really low value at the moment right now or aren't new or interesting. Lord knows we've already been promised mint and NFT, get a token, right? That's been pretty much all of the ETH plays that we've seen here historically before, right? I'm really not that excited about minting any new NFT at the moment right now with the hope of getting a token because we've also seen the time delays on those tokens, right? What have been the other challenges we've seen? Like, go look at what's happening right now, unfortunately, for Incarna, right? How long that wait has been in regard for that TGE event. Pixelmon's been a very long wait as well, even when they announce, or if you go all the way back until their early mint. And these become kind of the other core challenges is that, we're still a little bit worried of whether or not these asset classes will be valuable. I think they generally will, right? But we're all kind of having our faith into one entity again, right? Which is Binance. Binance still has control of influence on pretty much all the markets here at the moment right now, outside of probably Blast, where Binance really doesn't matter. So because of this now, what you're now running into is you're exactly right, rocket scientist. Like no one has faith that if you buy an NFT asset, that TG is going to happen anytime soon. Like maybe you were a fan of Persona. When is that TG is going to happen? Maybe you're a fan of Overworld and you just realize, oh fuck, I'm not getting Manasite anytime soon because it just got switched to Exterio. Hopefully that's better, but you don't know what your allocation is on that front at all, and it's kind of getting blind. And when you kind of have these disparate incentives that aren't actually aligned to the expectation of the asset, it effectively creates a massive disconnect between users and holders, right? And because of that, what you've actually ended up seeing is that you're seeing the death of community in a lot of ways. because there's no reason to be a community member, especially when you don't have long term conviction on the assets. But more importantly, you're actually incentivized to short term flip. And this kind of now leads to the larger problem, right? And when I say incentive design, you might have heard of incentive designs like factory models before on E. A factory model was where you'd get a Genesis asset first, and then that Genesis asset, everyone who owns that Genesis asset would get some sub asset from that, right? A good example of this was Bored Ape, and everyone got mutant apes, right? Although you had to spend a lot of money to get those mutant apes, but they were very profitable at that time to be able to mint that and get that here, right? Another good example is how Digidaigaku did it, right, with their first asset, and I think they also did something called Spirits or Shadows. I forget the exact name that they did, and kind of went down that line here as well. And because of that, right, what you start recognizing is that model worked in the last era, but it doesn't work in this new era. Right. In this new era, very few people want to own the secondary asset class when most primary asset classes aren't even holding up. Why would you want to be on the second layer or pegged value of a community when almost all the primary asset classes aren't working? So you've seen that incentive model of factory design kind of fade away, right? The next, incentive model right now that is left that we're left with is TGEs, right? And this requires either deep venture backing or deep positioning to be able to have a legit listing here. And to get a tier one listing, it's really tough, right? It's only Binance, and we have essentially a centralized force here that is essentially going to be a kingmaker on this front. And this is kind of sad because it means that the playbook has gotten so uninteresting because it's only in the hands of a few, right? And in the hands of a few, it means that if you're not participating as a holder on that, you're effectively on the outside, right? And this is kind of where we now have to figure out what could incentive models look like moving forward. And this is like our biggest challenge internally is that I'm now trying to find companies that are doing new incentive models that feel fresh. I would actually argue everything that we've seen about crypto and NFTs thus far is pretty much like an old era now. I really do believe this. It's an old era of how we did the initial first layer of this casino design. But now, when we know that there is a clear, apparent casino behind everything, the question now begs is how do the incentives adapt? How do the incentives change? And this is where we do believe stuff like community does matter when it's created correctly. It can't just be, oh, we're community because there's enough volume of fake language going on into our chat. That's not interesting. What we actually want to start valuing is mechanics like how are community members actually supporting each other? How are they actually interacting with each other with on chain elements? How are they actually contributing in collaborations here as well? And this is going to be something that I tell you to also keep an eye out on, and we'll be working on this as well for those incentive models too. But as we take the next step and look past ordinals and runes, the question that begs is, does farming effort actually pay off? And this is something that I will inherently tell you farming 100% pays off. But it now depends on which chain you're farming. And that's kind of the more important thing to understand now because we are not getting new retail coming in, right? Majority of this price action is done by existing degens or potentially buy pressure coming from institutions on ETFs. What we have is that we don't have no new consumers. We don't really have new consumers being created at the moment right now. So we're actually just stuck in the same casino, and it just comes down to is it a holiday weekend where there's more activity in the casino this week? Or if not, it'll just kind of be a slow week at the casino here as well. Or is one of the casinos doing a large enough new show or a large enough new yield or a large enough new jackpot to bring people here as well? And I think you're right, Wild West Crypto. We haven't had new consumers since 2022. And that also becomes like this larger challenge now is that, okay, what feels new? What feels fresh? And much easier said than done, but this is actually where I think the market now needs to kind of react. And there's very few fresh, very few new, very few clean cultural movements here. And this now kind of then begs on, okay, well, if I don't want to play the NFT slash ordinal slash digital asset game, can I play the farming game? And as I mentioned, I'm a huge proponent of farming. I think it's the smartest thing you can be doing, right? And I don't really think farming's the right word. Farming's the dumb word that we give to it, right? Really, it is you're an early adopter. You're an early user of protocols that have incentivizations to provide for being early. And that's what we've always wanted in our life. If you think about it, like I don't know, when I was a kid and I listened to music, I was one of those people where I was really into hip hop and I was finding hip hop artists very early, right? I would listen to J. Cole very early. I was listening to Weekend very early, right? Because I was into the mixtape scenes and stuff. And a lot of these weren't artists that people knew about. But in the Web 2 world, I really didn't get any incentive for being early, right? I didn't get any incentive for going to, weekend concerts early when no one knew him and there's only like 60 people in the venue. I got that experience. That was probably it, but I didn't get any other compounding incentives. But I think that is now going to change in the world of crypto here, which is kind of really compelling. And this is kind of the incentive model that is aligned. They need users to attract to their chain. Best example of this, of course, is Blast. Right. What we're seeing what Blast is doing is probably one of the most compelling things here in this market because they're giving enough yield or potential yield to get people excited about their Ponzi game. But the question that begs is what happens when that Ponzi ends, right? Is there a likelihood you're going to hold that token? Is there a likelihood you're going to invest in that chain or are you going to rotate that asset somewhere else? And this is actually what I think is like the most important thing to understand now about this market is that because we've had no new users realistically since 2022, right? Or at least no major catalyst since new consumers coming in since like 2022. We're effectively stuck playing the exact same game with the exact same people, but we're expecting different results, right? But that's kind of insane. Why would we get different results when everything's pretty much aligned in the same way? The only argument that you can say that has been somewhat new has been the fact that, this market has effectively flipped, or sorry, Blur and Blast has flipped another Ponzi for another speculative token to be that yield. But the question now begs is there any real long term upside left? And this is a really interesting quandary and challenge. The truth is, there is actually real tech being built to a certain extent. And this is actually where I think the real truffles for Bitcoin is going to come. So, as we discussed last week and we discussed even on Tuesday, right, the important thing to understand is Bitcoin L2s don't exist. Bitcoin L2s are not real today. Everything that you know that is claiming to be a Bitcoin L2 is probably a side chain at best. And the real reason for that is that there's no way for us to actually do real on-chain computation that we need for an effective real L2 where money goes in and out from that L2 and resolved in the base layer. We are still not at that level. People are utilizing other chains to be able to circumvent that and then have other centralized forces behind it in order to make it some value. And there's two things that we need to understand is that that's not a chain, that's not a true L2, but the other thing we want to understand as well is that it doesn't mean that, and that's a very important thing. Side chains can have value. Side chains can have airdrop value. Side chains can have long-term value. So that's something still worth considering. But what is the real holy grail? It's trying to be as close to the teams that are going to find a real solution to a Bitcoin L2. That is the actual absolute opportunity that you need to keep an eye out on. Because if that does open, Bitcoin flourishes as an L2 infrastructure, right? But this means that you now need to understand the tech, right? Because Zabu's right. You cannot have a layer 2 on BTC at the moment because there are no smart contracts. There's no ability for you to create smart composition that can be enforced through a contractual layer on BTC at the moment as it is currently constructed. But here's the good news. There are many teams going after this that are venture backed and have different solutions at play. Doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to be something they can do with a snap of fingers, right? There are regulatory hurdles. What I mean by regulatory, it's not regulatory in the form of the government. It's regulatory in the form of the current consensus within Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is now at a very interesting tipping point. Bitcoin now needs to ask itself, are we actually going to compete with Ethereum's ecosystem, or are we happy with what Bitcoin is currently resolved to having at the moment, which is very limited. It's not a lot of stuff that you can do on Bitcoin, but the question begs is that are we happy with just the financial basics that Bitcoin can touch into? And I think Bitcoin maxis are going to quickly realize they can't wait. And I think Wild West Crypto hits on it correctly. And I think Udi Werthmeyer hit on this really directly on his last post. The Ethereum ETF should create a catalyst for Bitcoin. Now, no longer can you believe that Ethereum will never get an ETF. Like if you're not familiar, one of the largest of this was MicroStrategy chairman Saylor. Michael Saylor continued to state that no matter what, no one else will get an ETF approved outside of Bitcoin. Now it doesn't look like that's the case. Because of that, right? What it now looks like is now it's really an open game. It's an open game that they're now going to get ETF approval if that is the case today and or tomorrow. Bitcoin can't wait. Bitcoin will need to react, and this is the right forcing function that we want. It doesn't mean that this forcing function immediately creates an L2 opportunity, but I think you're going to have people who are going to start having that debate if they truly want Bitcoin to be the largest market cap out there, if they truly want Bitcoin to be the largest chain out there. And this gets really interesting, right? Because there are a lot of teams that do have solutions that aren't that far away. One of the best solutions here at the moment right now is potentially from the Quantum Cats Taproot Wizard team, which is essentially around bringing back one functionality called OP underscore cat to be able to bring back a functionality called concatenate, right? Which is the ability to combine, two different elements, which essentially opens up Merkle trees, which can then effectively open up some version of roll-ups and BTCL2 infrastructure. But it does require approval. It requires this BIP to be approved by the community and make sure that it comes through, which is not an easy hurdle. There's a few other technical teams that are trying to find other solutions in. And here's what I would be making as a bet if I'm in one of your guys' shoes. Hey, you should go learn about this a little bit more in detail, and we'll share more and we'll keep breaking this down. I mean, I already read you the bedtime story about what the Quantum Cats put in their last comic book or their children's story book. But the important thing here that you want to probably be betting on is that the asymmetrical bet is someone will open up a path to an L2 on Bitcoin. I want to know the team that does it first, and I want to be there to be able to be positioned for those assets here as well. So, what is, I think, one of the smartest things that you could be acquiring if you're a whale? QC starts getting really interesting. Quantum Cats start getting really interesting if you have the liquidity to buy that. If you don't have the liquidity to buy that, what you should be doing, no matter what, you should be doing all the missions and farm events that Quantum Cats is putting out. They call them missions. They're missions or challenges that they put out every 2 to 4 weeks. You should be participating in that. It's not that you believe that they're going to be the only ones to get there or the first ones to get there, but you believe that they have a team that is competent enough to potentially get there. And you want to start making your marks and bets on those individuals because whoever unleashes the Bitcoin L2, that spout is going to be incredibly profitable and rich in regard to what it's going to unlock. And that's when Bitcoin kicks into its next gear. This is the other honest truth. Bitcoin doesn't have that next gear at the moment right now until that happens. So we're kind of in an innovation. So this is good for builders. If you're actually a builder on Bitcoin L2, you have time. You have the ability to actually execute, think through ideas, and bring some value here to the ecosystem that can be either art driven, collector driven, or technology driven. And you actually have an opportunity to build on that, which I think is really important. So this is kind of where you now need to start understanding, right? Is that, hey, is this going to happen? Right. And you're right. While with crypto, it is a bit of worry that it never happens, right? So this is also why then you now need to figure out how you become global citizens on this front. And this is the other thing that we really want to highlight. Ronin as a server is absolutely going to be BTC, maxi oriented with a lot of our conversations and our decisions. But we're not going to be foolish. We're not going to be the ones who are saying that BTC only, right? I believe farming opportunities will actually be more lucrative on non-BTC chains in the next 3 months, right? Blast has been way more lucrative than probably any other thing to kind of quote unquote be farming. Some required some money, but a lot of it didn't require a lot of capital to get in, which I think is really interesting. I don't think that opportunity on Blast is going to last much longer than a few more weeks, maybe a month, right? Realistically, but that's now what you want to be thinking of yourself as a global citizen in the space. You want to be asking yourself, hi, I am a crypto passport holder. I want to go to the chain that will provide me the most opportunity to aggregate assets of value that will allow me to potentially accumulate more sats or whatever your primary, sats or GUI or whatever you do care about as your primary token. And in doing so, right, this is how you want to start getting ready because I think you're going to see more opportunities on L2s now opening up on Ethereum. And this is actually really great about spot ETFs coming, right? If we can get a spot ETF for Ethereum here, this is a huge opportunity for L2s. And this is also another reason that L2s have a huge opportunity on Ethereum more than they do on Bitcoin. It's the fact that almost all these L2s have huge amounts of capital, right? Even if we're looking at guys like IMX, they have hundreds of millions of dollars to allocate. Polygon, hundreds of millions of dollars to allocate. Arbitrum, hundreds of millions of dollars to allocate. Starknet, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars ability to allocate here, right? AVAX, hundreds of millions of dollars ability to allocate, right? So all these guys need is a reason and a resurgence for one of these narratives to open up, and they can actually deploy capital to bring builders, to bring users over in. Is it going to be something where you're going to see another bull run like we saw back in 2020, 2021? Absolutely not. Those are different variables that came in to be able to allow for it. But it doesn't mean that this needs to be a cold summer, right? Although it might be a little bit cold on Bitcoin here, and we'll talk a little bit about the rallies here about some of the runes. I do believe that you should be aiming to be a global citizen here and getting your positions ready. You should be ready for Blast. You should be ready for L2s on ETH. You should be ready for ETH mainnet for their last TGE hurrahs because they should all be now coming into market. Now they all should be going. If anything, Binance should be accelerating Pixelmon, should be accelerating Incarna, should be accelerating all of these things. And you want to now see where that flow of capital is going to go. I think most of those projects are going to have their TGEs, and you'll see some hard dumps on the ones that are more short term allocated. I think Pixelmon will actually have a little bit more of the long term support, which is great, right? And we're going to see that exactly on Monday. Should be really exciting. Almost great timing kind of coming in here at the moment right now. But yeah, I think Checkmate is asking the right question. When does manga and anime do Azuki? When do Weebox? When do a few of these other partnerships come in? When do those TGs happen? When does Overworld, when does Exterio have it? And then how many sub tokens are they going to do and whether or not they're going to sustain? I mean, I think Exterio is by far the weakest of the group here. If we're looking at as a cluster, that's probably the one that's going to have the hardest dump kind of post mint. But what you kind of recognize here is that you're going to see a little bit of a resurgence across the network and the ecosystem. So being early in Bitcoin is still has massive advantages, but the Bitcoin tipping point is unknown. And that's kind of what you want to take away from this conversation. Because it's unknown, you need to maintain your global citizenship approach, right? You need to be ready for where those assets are going to be able to be unlocked and where you can be making plays where it makes sense to farm. So the good thing as a community, we're going to try helping you guys at least with both, a few core chains, right? ETH and Bitcoin. Specifically, we're also going to find some ways to help with Blast kind of post token launch if there's a meaningful opportunity there. But lastly, we're also going to keep an eye on all the emerging L2s. We're right now looking very closely to Starknet. We're looking very closely to Optimism. We're looking very closely to Arbitrum here at the moment right now. And I think all of these may have opportunities of resurgence, which I think could be really positive and potentially really exciting here too. So as you kind of take a step back, right, what do you now need to kind of understand? Well, in order to be a farmer, you probably need to be a truly technical. I think this is going to be one of the things if you want to win on Bitcoin. If you really want to win on Bitcoin, you need to understand the differences of why an L2 can or cannot succeed on Bitcoin as of today. You need to understand the limitations of the tech. Because if you're able to communicate at these levels, you'll understand which positions you want to hold for short term versus long term. For example, there's probably going to be a lot of side chains that I still will continue farming if I believe they have the right venture back path to listing. It's not because I'm betting on them because I believe they're going to be superior technology. I just believe that they have the narrative to be able to capture a meaningful amount of ROI that it's worth putting a few of their seeds into the crops that I'll be essentially farming, right? But in reality, what I'm really looking for is building my conviction bets. And this is where you can build your conviction bets, right? Like, what would if I could go back in time, I'm Quantum Cats right now and Taproot Wizards, 100%. That's the most profitable thing you could be doing here at the moment because they also gave around, NFT assets away. To be honest, if you actually look at Quantum Cats, it is right now one of the best incentive model structures right now that I've seen on Bitcoin. Well, first is they have a Genesis asset that no one could actually get access to in the form of Taproot Wizards, right? Or at least very few people have access to it here at the moment right now. Not tradable. No one knows price value, etc. on that front. Next, right, they then allowed a different layer or secondary layer asset to be launched, which is Quantum Cats, which does have trade value, holding really high value as well. But also traditionally, or at least what we can maybe assume, and this might be a leap in the assumption, but let's kind of go with it, is that that NFT or that ordinal based asset will give you some type of yield to whatever their L2 may be if they are able to achieve it, right? Which I think is also incredibly important. That is a really good way to roll up that value of that asset and kind of sustain that in a very different way. Because it means that when that L2 comes, they have an uncapped value asset in the form of whatever Taproot Wizards will become. And they can then create an incentive model because they have not over allocated Taproots yet, that they don't have any expectation. And Quantum Cats, kind of being the secondary asset, will have some expectation that can be easily met. And it's kind of a nice little ecosystem actually forming around their assets. While a lot of the other projects will have challenges, right? For example, and there's no shot at them by any means. I'm a huge fan of OMB and what they're doing, but OMB is now going to run into the factory problem, right? How many layers of your factory can go off before the yield just starts becoming diluted? And they're probably reaching that number here at the moment of over 5,000, right? We saw blue eye, red eyes, that then led to yield of green eyes, that then led to the yield of orange eyes. Again, you could maybe do one more action, I guess, if you really wanted to, but I feel kind of there. Their challenge now is how do they get nice ordered value amongst now technically 3/4 different assets in their collection, which is a very hard thing to make economically work on whatever they launch in the future. And this is kind of the same problem Digidagaku ran into. They ran so many sub factory additions that they ended up diluting almost all the value of anything after the essentially the first layer, if not the second layer, right? And this kind of becomes their challenge there too. And now what you're going to see, there's a lot of ordinal assets that are going to try building secondary product utility, but the truth is, in the game of casino, no one really cares. That's the hardest challenge now in this marketplace, is that when it's become so directly casino oriented and opportunity cost is one of the realest things here, the ability to develop a product or any type of real quality product is actually going to be a negative trend for a casino play because casinos don't have that time. So this is why you could see a lot of these mints that minted before the halving, although they may have been able to accumulate a lot of capital, they've essentially put almost all their holders underwater, right? And this has led to a very different function. And that's kind of the rough thing about Bitcoin here at the moment, is that almost no one's able to cross that chasm to be a tier one asset. I think Blob is probably the only outlier in the last 90 days, I would argue, that has been somewhat meaningful of an ordinal only asset. And again, they got a little boost because they also tied it to a rune, but primarily as an ordinal art based asset, it's done well. Where pretty much everything else in the last 90 days is that they may have had a successful mint, but a successful mint isn't the metric. It's actually the metric that matters is, do your most powerful holders have economic alignment and upside with you? So if you look at these mints that might have been hyped at the start and then they allowed their power holders to accumulate post mint and they went into a frenzy for whatever 2 days, 5 days, couple weeks, but now they're now returning back. What you end up seeing is that, and we looked at these metrics, is of those mints in the last 90 days, 85% to 90% of power holders, meaning like whale holders, are underwater. It means their position is in a negative position here at the moment, and that's quite brutal, right? Because the best economic play for a lot was to sell immediately and then rebuy, which of course is always easy to say in hindsight, right? But that's a really large pain point that's going to make it really hard to grow that user base, right? Your most valued users who believe most in your brand have essentially been entrenched to be underwater and they now have to kind of live with it. And that's not what you want to build your brand relationship, right? If you think about a consumer relationship, right? The worst thing you want to do is that when a consumer buys your product, they now lost money on it, right? And this is kind of the hard part because you can only control so much price and you can only control so much, if anything, on the secondary price. And this is where the secondary price is crushing a lot of these projects, and it creates a really tough scenario to be able to get out because now you have pressure of underwater whales, and they may not have the time and this opportunity cost to wait to see those dividends come through because this is getting more and more casino like by each day, right? Like this is kind of what you absolutely do, is that it's getting more and more and more and more competitive in that casino because we're going straight casino with everything we're doing. right? Blur and Blast is one of the best at it, right? I mean, they even have fucking jackpots. They lean directly into it, own the casino. So the question you want to ask is anything beyond the casino with JPEGs, right? Casino with some other yield? Or should we just be only going to yield and just stake and roll bit for the rest of our future here at this moment too? And this is the conundrum now because we've put so much economic value on, let's be very transparent, sparse digital assets, right? Very minimal digital assets that we're now struggling to justify its luxury value, right? We're now struggling to justify the luxury, and we've seen this already with Bored Apes. We even saw CryptoPunks get hit a little bit with their kind of misexecution, where they've introduced execution risk to a certain extent to the project there at Bored Ape and Yuga. This is where you also feel like nothing is safe, right? We thought even CryptoPunks were safe, but the team somehow introduced execution risk to it. So they're not even technically safe. Don't get me wrong, I still would buy a CryptoPunk, but it's not as foolproof as you'd hope it would be here as well. And you can see this when we go look at all these other pages across, right? Let's go look at Magic Eden and let's go look at, Bitcoin assets here. It's brutal. Node Monkeys back down to 0.25. Bitcoin Puppets back down to 0.164. Quantum Cats under zero point 0.3 again. Or OMB almost going back under zero point 0.3 here as well. I mean, this is where we're back to mint prices, right? On a lot of these assets to a certain extent, on at least for Orange Eyes, was pretty close, right? And this is kind of it. Bitcoin fraud down to 0.054. Even Blob's kind of pulling back, even though I noted them as an outlier, right? Still 0.04 BTC. You see some new ones, Base Angels at 0.0037, Inc. now at 0.0079, so under 0.08, almost getting close back to mint price here as well, to a certain extent. This is just kind of where the market has turned across these assets. So what we've seen very quickly is that ordinal assets are going to continue to languish until an outlier narrative or new incentive model is introduced. The outlier could be a mimetic play. Those are really hard to understand when and where they'll connect, but you want to be ready for those mimetic plays. But the truth is, you want to look for new incentive models. And we're even seeing even projects like Art struggling. Like right now, if you want to mint, there's an open mint right now. This Fusion by Billy Rusty and Gabe Weiss. Again, I don't think this art is bad. I just think it all looks the same from Billy Rusty. There's just a lot of stuff that just feels like it's in the same category right now. But even the supply of 3,333, Billy Rusty, somewhat known artist, right? Fairly well known. He's done a lot of collaborations, and it's in public, and it's not really moving. It's kind of stuck here around this 50%. It's slowly grabbing, but it's just showing you that there's very little appetite across the board, right? And this is kind of like the larger challenge now is that you're seeing everything kind of getting rallied. And then the question is, okay, well, maybe these ordinals aren't doing well. Maybe runes are doing well. Thank God runes at least had a little bit of rally. As I mentioned, we have Dog going back up to around 400 million here at the moment right now. Arsic getting back to 200. It looks like they both have dipped just under that here, right? We've seen a little bit of movement. We've also seen some mid caps here start making some interesting movements, right? The Donald Trump, Pi Network rune here as well. Even Decentralized had a little bit of movement going back from 25 million back to a 41 million, right? Up almost 40% in that, 35% in that window. So we're seeing a little bit coming back, which I think is really important. And we want to keep an eye on this kind of stuff here as well. But the question is, why are they actually coming back? Well, a lot of it you could be actually arguing is that it's Bitcoin. I'm sorry, it's Binance rumor still. There's a lot of belief that Binance is coming relatively soon. I do believe Binance will be coming soon. They continue to post about it. The only difference is that Binance is not in any press. Binance is the savior. So the challenge is like, how fast are they willing to move to be able to take over the market is very interesting. But if they do act, I do believe this is something that could probably 2x the market cap of Bitcoin of runes as an asset single handedly, if not more. But I don't know how well it sustains, right? It's kind of fearful that we're actually at this market on every front. And this just shows you how boring the game has gone into, is that the same thing is required on any chain right now. And that is Binance, you're our only hope, right? Like we're a Princess Leia, and all we're trying to do only hope on ETH TGEs. Binance, you're our only hope of bringing liquidity to runes on BTC. And this just shows you that, like, don't get me wrong, give credit to Binance where they have power, but it also shows you how boring this game has gotten. That we are all now going back to a singular centralized party that now needs to figure out when they're going to align and when they're going to take. And probably in a lot of ways, will be insider driven in a lot of ways too on where those first things will come through, who will get the first listings, and where this will play out. But it's kind of scary because if we're all waiting on the same partner, it's almost baking for disappointment to a certain extent. And that's something you want to also keep an eye out in there as well, is that fuck, is anything going to work? And this is kind of where you're seeing this market now. You have to questions of, okay, where do you want to keep your positions here? So at the moment right now, I still have about 92% of my position. I'm still between RSIC and Dog Go to the Moon. I did sell about 8% of my position here in the last week on only Dog. I sold Dog at 320, 360, and 400 million market cap, just a little bit, only because I have no clue how long it's going to take. And I just felt it was prudent to take a little bit of liquidity near quote unquote all time highs when they were as a asset class. I still want to believe in the long term vision. Majority of my position now on RSIC. That's the one thing I did about a couple weeks ago. And I'm not saying that RSIC is going to be the clear outlier winner over Dog. I don't think that is actually the case. I just have more conviction in RSIC having a catalyst. I don't think Dog has catalyst after Bitcoin, after Binance. I don't think it has anymore. And that's a very large, scary thing for me at the moment, right? But they're probably the ones who are going to benefit the most off a Binance listing. I think RSIC also benefits, of course, of a very way. But I like that RSIC has partnerships with Meme Land. They're thinking through allocations. They have their own control of their supply. And this is kind of the way where you do want a kind of a centralized team to a certain extent to be able to create those catalysts and have incentives to continue to create those catalysts. And of course, meme coin for the sake of meme coin, I get it. But I actually have actually been turned off by the idea over the last few months that the largest meme coin should be on Bitcoin. I actually don't believe that will be the case. I do believe that the asset class of runes is going to be still very valuable, but I don't believe that intrinsically needs to be the case that the largest meme coin is, because let me be very honest, meme coin buying still sucks on Bitcoin, right? Why would I ever introduce people to this? Like, please send me anywhere else at the moment right now as well. So this is kind of why I think it's important as you guys look in this reflection on where your opportunities will be. It's more about now being ready to be that global crypto citizen. That's really how you want to think of things, is be ready for that global crypto play so that you can actually take advantage of 1 to 3 month windows for any given chain, right? The last 2 to 3 months has been won by Blast. That should have been where you were the optimized farming play at the moment right now. Blast is about to end. The question now begs is, and that's what you want to keep an eye out on. Maybe it does come back to Rune. Maybe it does go back to Order. Maybe ETH TGEs are going to be the win, right? Somehow. This is what we now want to be ready for, because this is the same insight we shared on Tuesday. There's only enough liquidity for 1 or 2 metas to run right now. And the good thing, though, about this market is that we've taught everyone to be global citizens. You could generally shift pretty easily. Almost every savvy 20,000 wallets that we have here in this market have both an ETH wallet or EVM compatible and a BTC compatible at this point. That's brilliant. It means that they could shift their liquidities through those pretty effortlessly. There's some cost, but it's not prohibitive, right? To be very honest, you can just use Magic Eden to do those conversions. There's a few other convert those, ETH to BTC pretty easily, or SOL to BTC, etc. So what you now want to think about, and this is what we're going to kind of be sharing starting next week, is we'll share with you what we think are the top farming opportunities across crypto. So we'll show you the top BTC play, the top ETH play, and the top like L2 or Blast play as well. And we'll talk about those a little bit more openly. And of course, you should be choosing your time, because this is what you get to do as a citizen. You have control of your own time. You have control of where you want to put your resources, your energy, your support behind that. And you should be getting paid in the form of yield for that. You should be getting compensation in the upside for that. That's how you want to think about your time kind of moving forward as this market continues to develop and continues to scale. The challenge is still just catalyst beyond Binance, but something will come. Builders are building, VCs are funding, consumers are asking questions. Something will meet this market's needs. It always will. That is the kind of the beauty of this. That's what you want to keep in the back of your mind. Who is going to find this? Who is going to break it through? And who's going to bring that activity here? And can you capitalize on day one? So Roden will definitely have you covered on everything BTC. That's probably the thing we're going to spend most of our time on. But we'll also do our best to kind of bring you more opportunities as we see the other chains open up. And that's how you become a true farmer in this market here as well. I wish BTC played out in a much more interesting way. I wish Runes played out in a much more interesting way. I wish ordinals didn't go fucking straight to zero. And it feels like zero when you go look at this. It's pretty brutal when you're looking at just the volume overall, the lack of trade, the amount of activity. It's pretty rough across the board. And this is kind of something you want to now understand. I've gone through this. How do I now get ready for the next class up? And there's going to be a lot of other interesting assets that are coming in. And more importantly, they should be low cost. And I think that's the one bullish thing about Bitcoin moving forward, at least if we take away anything. I don't think it's going to be going to cost you an arm and a leg. We're not going to have mints at 0.01. We're going to have mints at 0.001. We're talking about $70 mints or less, right? Sub $100 mints. And that's kind of what we've always wanted on ETH, right? It's kind of what we've always wanted on all these other projects. And I think Bitcoin is going to reset to that. And this means that you can have more experimentation, more fun, but just more interesting design. And that's where I think ETH and I think that's where BTC all are going to start creating another positive thing. I think the other thing you want to think about is the ETH ETF is right. More ETFs, more institutional capital coming in. That's a better chance of capital coming in than consumer capital, right? We're not getting new users anytime soon. So let's go get institutional capital and continues to be another way to buoy up the value of the overall ecosystem. But I also think it's going to light a fire under everyone. The opportunities are only going to get larger, are only going to get more interesting, and they're only going to come out further out of left field. You want to be prepared to capture each and every one of those all the way through. And hopefully, with that, you'll have much, much, much more upside. In regard to what you could be farming on BTC, one protocols. Layer one protocols still seem to be the clearest value prop. So if you have liquidity, you should be doing Liquidum, which we've already shared quite a bit. It's probably the thing I am currently farming the most by just lending assets because I know a lend protocol is going to be valuable on BTC in both the short and more importantly long term. And especially if we start going down to L2s, that same liquidity protocol will follow down those L2s in BTC. Aside from that, I'm trying to keep a good eye on side chains that are solidly venture backed, right? So Binance, OKX Ventures, Kraken. I'm trying to see which of those strategic partnerships are coming in, and we'll share that as well next week. The last thing I'm looking for is what's worth degenning and playing in on sub $100 mints, sub $50 mints. I think you're going to see a lot of these where there's windows where you mint 100, right? I'm not saying you should be doing that with any project, but that opportunity makes it quite interesting because that's where a lot of the net worth came is when you started to have the opportunity on these slower mints accumulate and you were able to get 10 or 20 or 30 of those mints and it led to some type of massive coalescing effort. And again, I'm not saying I would be doing that on every mint out here by any means, but that is a really cool opportunity that's kind of come back in and giving us a little bit more access here as well. So we should see the boost of value of all these assets, right, across the board. We should see new paradigms coming in. You should see new builders and new protocols. But the clear takeaways here is trust no one when they say Bitcoin L2, right? Trust no one if they try to soon, right? We know all GGs still take forever, although Pixelmon on Monday, which will be really interesting to see how that plays out. And then more importantly, right, what you want to understand is that you are a citizen of all crypto. If you want to get into BTC, start studying BTC. Start reading the articles, start being understanding the tech. That is the realest alpha you can get. Be a true consumer and true interactor of this market. Most of this market is not that, right? People who go into casinos don't understand is built, who owns the casino, what is the infrastructure that is built on the casino. They just care about is what are the odds. And don't get me wrong, there's value in knowing that too, but there's a whole different type of to come, and that is the educated user who actually understands the numbers. And Bitcoin technology is a competitive advantage. Understanding Bitcoin more than others is a competitive advantage, and we'll be going through that. So also in the next couple of weeks, what you're going to see is that all of the deployments on not only our own custom node, but we'll also talk a little bit more about understanding all the details of transactions on the chain so that you can start finding alpha when projects are minting, deploying, or getting ready for stuff here as well too. Outside of that, the other thing you want to kind of keep your as well is just really trying to figure out, in the long run, how well do these TGEs go, right? If Binance can bring this market back to life, awesome. But also that means that it also has the curse of giving it a death blow, right? If Binance doesn't save these projects, we're kind of all fucked in a long way, right? Because Binance has been the savior that the market has been consistently waiting for. So this is now the thing that we want to keep in. So watch Pixelmon on Monday, right? Figure out when the fuck Exteria is doing whatever the fuck they're doing with Overworld, right? Figure out when anime and manga to make, right? Because these are going to be really telling signs of whether or not the market truly has legs to keep this degeneracy going, or if it needs to create a new narrative. And the last thing I share with you to close out this day, try to find stuff that feels fresh. Ask yourself, what can you actually do on chain that feels fresh, new, and different? That's what we really want to see in this market. If we can get stuff that feels different in the way that incentives are aligned, or collaboration is established, or where this asset has more value as a standalone asset before it has a tradable asset, that's kind of what you want to keep an eye out. And I know it's easier said than done. It's always easier said to talk about try to find something fresh. But this is kind of what you want to keep your eye out on, right? It's kind of like, if you're in modern art, right? Having an eye to figure out which artists and narratives are coming is going to be pretty important, right? And if you can do it, it'll be pretty valuable. Ed Buck asked a good question. Are y'all still farming Moto? I'm currently done farming Moto only because I've done a shit ton of accounts. Like I think the last count I got to is I'm at over 85 accounts with over 150 points each. And I have one massive account that also has I think close to 800 points. It's my largest, I think, something like that. I got to go look at my. Um, the only reason I say why it's still worth farming Moto because it still hits two stones with, kills two birds with one stone, right? You get access to a swap protocol and CBRC 20 protocol. But if you've already farmed 5 or 10 of those, I think you're good, right? If you've already hit that. If you have nothing else to farm, then you can definitely keep doing it. But what you should be asking yourself is, what should I be replacing for farm? And although I would say blast, but you already kind of need a little bit of entry in the blast. Kind of hard to cold start in the blast and take advantage of the next 2 to 3 weeks. I know Wild West Crypto has a few little tools and resources maybe up his sleeve on that front. But I think generally, right, what you really want to know is what's the next farm? What's the next thing you should be farming? So the next thing I would be farming right now is I'd be farming Quantum Caps. They currently have another mission. I recommend that. And then I'd be farming any of the L1 protocols. So Liquidium is one of those as well too. There's still a few others here. I still would be farming Zulu. Nice, man. Zulu mainly because it's still going to be a side chain, but Zulu has the right venture backing here as well. So that's kind of what we want to add. But this is kind of the thing that there's not going to be as many farms that are tier 1 in the next 30 to 60 days. It might take a little bit more time. And this is also why I want to keep close eye on certain rune pad launches here as well. See where that kind of brings in and where that infrastructure is going to get. So a lot of stuff that's still developing. We want to keep a close eye on all of it, right? And this is how you're going to be able to be dynamic to capture the upside in this market. Don't get caught holding anything too long. Don't get caught in taking long-term bets when you know the entire market is very short-term thinking. And although that traditionally would be a smart bet, in casinos it's not to be smart to be that counterintuitive to a certain extent because the liquidity is extracted so quickly from different opportunities at every different moment. I'm sure a lot of you who may be holding on to your blue chips in Bitcoin, it doesn't feel comfortable right now. It really doesn't. Right? I don't feel comfortable with my quantum cats, even though I love quantum cats. But it's because I don't know what their timeline is. I don't know what their catalyst is. I don't know where that asset is going to be correctly valued, right? It's a little bit of a rough ride for kind of everyone here. And but there is going to be new value. There will always be new value created. There will be a new store of value. We need to be able to be first at what those are identified as. And that's our goal kind of week to week in with kind of all these events. So, we'll hopefully do a few more live farming events, have something farming. We'll even show you Liquidium here as well in the next week, just so you can get a sense of how lending protocols are working on that front too. But outside of that, what you want to realize is start looking at other chains and start being a student as fast as you can. Easiest way to get alpha, easy way to get projected up to the next level. If there's anything else you should be doing is mature wallets. Keep maturing wallets. Keep using new wallets. Every time you want to buy a new asset, you should be buying it with a new wallet and funding it with a new centralized exchange and starting to build that history. Keep building history of wallets. You have more time now to build history of wallets than ever before that look more seasoned, right? That look like real users, that look like real collectors. This is super important, especially as we start going into this world of where potentially yield will be coming to. So with that all, we're going to let you all go. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Go always check out the Koi Pond, see what conversations are happening, and hopefully from there, you'll be able to find more and more value. With that all, we're going to let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat soon. Bye now.